A single trace of DNA on a knife sheath. How did it lead investigators to Bryan Kohberger? Let's break down the forensic process step by step. November 13, 2022. 4 University of Idaho students were found fatally stabbed in their off-campus residence in Moscow, Idaho. Investigators recovered a K-bar knife sheath found on the bed near one of the victims, Madison Mogen, partially under her and the comforter. By November 20, 2022, the Idaho State Lab detected a single source of DNA on the sheath's button. They conducted STR, short tandem repeat analysis, a quick, cost-effective method for DNA profiling. This STR profile was run through CODIS, Combined DNA Index System, but did not return a match. However, it confirmed the DNA belonged to a male. Key point: the DNA was successfully extracted and analyzed by this point. Potential contamination? Defense's argument. If the DNA was contaminated or otherwise introduced during the investigation, as the defense argues in its June 22, 2023 objection, it must have happened prior to November 20, before the Idaho lab analyzed it. By this stage, the DNA had already been processed and extracted. Any external contamination or planting would have needed to happen beforehand. If contamination occurred after this lab analysis, it wouldn't have been used to build the suspect profile. In December 2022, with no CODIS match, investigators turned to Investigative Genealogy, IGG, though the exact start date remains unclear. A private laboratory, believed to be Othram according to the defense, initially began using genetic genealogy to construct a family tree. To enable this process, the lab first created a single nucleotide polymorphism (SNP) profile, a forensic step separate from IGG. The lab uploaded this profile to a genetic genealogy database, which reformatted the file to fit its system criteria. After law enforcement decided the FBI would take over the IGG work, the lab ceased its efforts and transferred the database reformatted SNP profile to the FBI, while retaining the original. The FBI submitted this SNP profile to one or more publicly available genetic genealogy services and other investigative databases, to compare it against existing genetic data. This process identified distant relatives of the suspect, providing an investigative lead. Once this lead was developed, the FBI removed the SNP profile in accordance with DOJ policy. However, the defense later argued in court that the FBI may have accessed genetic databases that were not fully open to law enforcement, raising legal concerns over IGG practices. Using these distant genetic matches, the FBI then constructed family trees to identify closer relatives of the suspect and narrow down potential leads. This process ultimately led investigators to Bryan Kohberger's family, but it was only an investigative lead, not admissible evidence of guilt. STR testing was still required to confirm any evidentiary match. December 27, 2022. Law enforcement agents in Pennsylvania collected trash from the Kohberger family residence in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. Before collecting the trash, they had already been surveilling the home. This trash was then sent to the Idaho State Lab for DNA testing. December 28, 2022. Idaho State Lab conducted STR testing on DNA recovered from the trash. This was not part of IGG, but a standard STR familial DNA comparison, used to establish a direct biological relationship. Findings: 1. The DNA profile from the trash was a strong paternal match to the DNA found on the knife sheath. 2. At least 99.9998% of the male population would be excluded from being the suspect's biological father. 3. This narrowed down the possible suspect to a direct biological male relative of the individual who provided the trash DNA, i.e., Bryan Kohberger. Key point: these findings establish probable cause for Kohberger's arrest warrant. December 30, 2022. Bryan Kohberger was taken into custody in Pennsylvania on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. January 4, 2023. Kohberger was extradited to Idaho and was held without bail. June 2023. Prosecutors confirmed that a buccal swab collected directly from Kohberger was a statistical match to the DNA found on the knife sheath. This was publicly announced in the state's June 16, 2023 motion. But the exact DNA confirmation date may have been earlier. Forensic note: STR versus SNP. STR, short tandem repeat analysis, focuses on specific repeating DNA sequences at targeted locations. Gold standard for criminal forensics and CODIS database matching. SNP, single nucleotide polymorphism analysis, examines single base pair variations across the entire genome. Used for genetic genealogy and familial searches. Key takeaway: STR was used to create the DNA profile for the initial CODIS comparison, conduct a familial DNA match using trash collected from the Pennsylvania residence, and later confirm Kohberger's direct match to the DNA on the knife sheath. A SNP profile was generated as a prerequisite for IGG to identify distant relatives of the suspect, which ultimately led investigators to Kohberger's family. Clarification on the two SNP data files received by the defense. 1. Othram's original SNP data file, before database upload, typically called an original SNP profile. 2. The FBI's version, which was the database reformatted SNP file used for IGG. These were not two different genetic profiles. Rather, the FBI's file contained the same SNP data, but was reformatted due to database processing. Quick note: a SNP profile refers to the actual genetic data, the unique set of SNP markers. A SNP file is the digital file that contains this profile. But why does the defense now claim that the FBI's version was more than twice as big? Initially, the defense appeared to believe it was simply a file that had been reformatted to meet the requirements of genetic genealogy databases. However, due to the significant size difference, they now question whether the FBI's file was processed beyond standard database reformatting. This raises concerns about whether additional modifications were made before IGG searches were conducted. This also leads to a key question. Which version of the SNP file did the FBI provide to the defense? Was it the same file the FBI initially received from Othram, already reformatted by the database? Or was it a later version, further processed, or even compiled from multiple database reformatted files, before being used in IGG searches? Or the version that ultimately led to a distant relative match? So far, the details remain unclear. In January 2025, additional DNA findings raised in court. During the hearing on the admissibility of DNA evidence and the validity of search warrants, the defense briefly referenced other DNA findings: unknown male blood found on a handrail inside the house, and on a glove outside the residence. However, the exact extent of forensic and investigative review of these DNA findings remains unclear. Did law enforcement give it adequate consideration as potential evidence? Or was it overlooked or deemed irrelevant to the case? If investigators chose not to pursue further analysis, potential reasons could include: 1. Age of the blood, degradation factors. If testing indicated the blood was not fresh, it may have been classified as unrelated to the crime. 2. Source and context. If no signs of struggle or connection to the crime scene were found, it may have been deemed pre-existing evidence from an unrelated event. 3. No evidentiary link to the crime or victims. If forensic analysis determined the blood did not match any known profiles in the investigation, it may have been deprioritized as unrelated. In general, investigators don't rely on just one of these factors. They assess multiple considerations before deciding whether to pursue evidence further. The judge acknowledged these findings but kept the focus on the STR DNA match on the knife sheath, indicating they were not central to the case. As of early February 2025, the court has not yet issued a ruling on the defense's motions to suppress evidence obtained through IGG. The outcome of this ruling could impact how IGG is evaluated in court, shaping its role in forensic investigations and legal standards. We will continue following any significant forensic developments as more details emerge. Thank you for walking through this case with us. We hope this video helped clarify some of the forensic ambiguities surrounding this case. If you found it helpful, please like and subscribe to Wim's Wonders for more thought-provoking stories.